girl earlier, interviewee earlier, and she told young girl, and she told me that she was told by the counsellor at school or something that it is okay to self-harm. It's okay to cut yourself. Don't
You're
feel bad about it.
joking.
Don't feel bad
Wow.
about it. I was like, what?
Jesus God. Yeah, yeah. Well, it is. Yeah, it's kind of. And I don't want to. There's a lot of theories over what's happening, but I don't think that the James Lindsay theory, whereby he says that his theory is basically that a lot of left wingers got bored waiting for the proletariat to wake up to the joys of revolution, and decided to skip them entirely and just start conditioning people in the classroom, and and teachers, like the amount of teachers coming out with this stuff, it's really frightening what's happened to the teaching profession.
Well, the teaching profession has collapsed in prestige. When it collapses, possibly in part because it's been taken over by women. When things get taken over by women, they collapse in prestige. Then lower quality people go there. I mean, my RE teacher at school, he was from Limerick, Mr. Sutton. He had a master's degree from University College London. Trained to be a Catholic priest in South Africa. Fell in love with a Cape Coloured girl. Came back, was an RE teacher. Very clever guy. Could have been a professor or whatever, but no, he was in teaching. People like that don't go to teaching anymore.
Yeah, yeah.
It's
Well, why would you go into teaching? It's kind of unrewarding, and yeah, I don't know. I understand that argument. Clearly, I couldn't possibly agree with it. Considering how many women would be angry with me,
no, but that's not the fact that people are angry with you doesn't mean it's not an accurate interpretation of the situation.
No, absolutely, it is.
And
it
equally,
is.
you could argue. I mean, I know you've a lot of feminist people, Posey Parker or whatever, that you've taken your side and so forth, and very good. But I suppose one could argue that women are more interested in harm avoidance and equality than men, and they're more socially conformist. They're more care about feelings and people, and they're more socially conformist. So couldn't you argue that the fact that it's got this far, that we can't even say to a deluded person, "You are not the thing you say you are," is a consequence of this promotion of feelings,
Yeah,
which is a female thing,
sure.
above all else?
Yeah, no, I think there's definitely an argument to be made, and also I do think that the particular form of harassment and bullying that comes out of social justice as a movement has a kind of feminine quality. It's very much being placed on the outside of the group, silencing,
Excluded from the little gang.
excluded from various little gangs. Yeah, so it does have some certain female qualities. I always say the thing about this movement, and I mean the trans movement, the social justice movement as it goes into the trans issue, is that while it benefits men the most, it seems to be driven by a lot of women, and it's very disturbing that so many women are complicit in their own destruction.
Argue, and that's an interesting point, Graham, because couldn't you argue, let's go back to, one thing I was going to wonder actually was, I wonder if, this period of the 60s to the whatever that was a creative, presumably that happened in Ireland a bit later.
Yes, everything happened in Ireland a little bit later.
So the creative period started maybe in the 80s.
Maybe, yeah, absolutely. And then Bono, yeah, U2 and stuff like that. I guess U2 and all that type of thing was kind of Ireland's, entry into the kind of modern world in a weird way.
But then you've hit back by being more woke than the British. Is this some sort of attempt to outdo the British in morality?
I think you see the same thing happening in Scotland. It's a knee-jerk reaction against the UK. I remember once when there were British feminists trying to fight this stuff, a bunch of Irish lib fems, I believe the term is, or intersectional feminists, wrote this letter talking about how these British feminists were a disgrace and so on, and you literally see people saying, "Oh, you're being influenced by Brits," or "You're being influenced by Yanks," or whatever it happens to be. And it's exactly what the Catholic Church used to do. The Catholic Church used to, priests used to regularly make sermons about trying to ignore the pernicious satanic influence of UK media, and and
I had this friend of mine at university, and I went and stayed at his parents' place in Galway, and the mother was British, the father was European, and so they were when he turned up at the school, had an English accent, and apparently there'd been some incident with some other boy, and they said the mother said, well, that other boy that said this is lying. And he said to the mother, who's English, no, Irish boys don't lie.
Yeah.
So that's the thing though about the women being because it was in many ways it was the women, the church ladies, that were pushing the last system of dogma, where it gets to a point where your kid has to be adopted because he's a product of an affair or whatever. To be.
And then there were always willing accomplices at other times of women being stepped on. Like I always think of the women who helped force feed the suffragettes, and the nuns who worked in the Magdalen laundries and so on. And I think there's a certain kind of feeling of pure goodness that motivates sadism sometimes, and I see that a lot in this movement. A very, very kind of you can almost see them feeling they're lit up by their own kind of intolerance of people like me,
It's righteous anger. They have the right to hate you because you're evil.
Yes, that's the other thing that I was constantly trying to warn people about with this movement. It was like, wait, you've got a movement that's full of people who are at the very least troubled, right? And you're telling them that feminists who want basic, protections for their sex hate them and want them to die. What a ridiculously dangerous thing to say to a group of, already vulnerable people.
We are marginalised. I had this with my paper. You're not marginalised. You're in the newspapers all the time.
Yeah.
People can be sacked or cancelled, completely cancelled. I know a chap who he can't, no bookshop in the country, even though he's got a book with a major publisher, will allow him to have a book signing simply because they're concerned that transsexuals will turn up and protest because he has said that he agrees with you.
Really? Who was that?
Andrew Gold.
Andrew Gold, I know that name.
Is an interesting show, interesting guy. He's got a YouTube channel. I've just been on there.
Andrew, yeah, Heretics.
Yes.
Oh, yes, of course. Sorry, Andrew, of course. I know Andrew well.
Because he has said he agrees with that viewpoint. That's it. He can't book signings. No way.
Yeah.
So the idea that they're persecuted, no, they're not. They're lauded.
Yeah. It's like what other movement has achieved so much in such a short space of time, right? It's come from nowhere, and suddenly we have the whole of society is being fit around them
for the sake of about 0.5% of the society, and then plus those that happen to. It then creates this hysteria though, where you feel a bit weird and a bit of an outcast. How could you gain social status? Oh, you can assert that you're trans, even though you're not really. You just identify as it. I mean,
there's so many people who are like, again, in the early days when we began to talk about this issue, one of the things that was hard to get across to people is that we're not talking about transsexuals here. We're not talking about people who've had an operation. We're talking about people who say they're going to have an operation and never get around to it. We're talking about people who don't have dysphoria. We're talking about various different forms of people who've realized that it's a ticket, it's a very, very valuable ticket.
There's a correlation with narcissism. It's a way of making people bow down to you if they're prepared to say black is white.
Yeah.
I'm so frightened of you and I so accept your dominance over me that I'm prepared to say black is white because it pleases you.
Absolutely, and not just that, but they're literally erasing words like mother and woman from, for instance, NHS documents. Like it's one thing to say black is white, but it's another thing to remove a word like mother from the English language, which connects us not just to our own mothers, but to every human being who's ever lived. It's an act of great violence to sever those words from us.
God created man and he created woman and demigender and trans and rainbow.